Hi, ladies. Hi, Claire. You all right, my love?
Yes. There was a few last-minute tech
There
amendments.
were. Sorry we're a bit late, everyone, but yeah, we had tech stuff going on. So if you've been looking for us, we're here now. Come and say hi. Claire doesn't use StreamYard. She likes Zoom. So all of this is going to be just breaking at every given opportunity, and that's totally cool. She's also got builders next door who keep cracking up about, so it's going to be loads of fun today. So thank you for joining us for our earlier sessions. You saw me at 10 o'clock and Claire Sweet at 2. You now are lucky enough to be seeing Dr. Clair Burley. She's a clinical psychologist specialising in relationships, and she's our relationship expert in the lounge. She spent a long time, 13 years in the NHS.
Yes, it was a long time.
It is a very long time. And now she runs her own private practice, helping individuals, couples and families who are in stuck or stressed relationships to heal and repair their negative patterns. What a great, cool job.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So Claire is going to talk to you all today about how to tame your inner critic using self-compassion, which I think we could all use right now. I don't think anyone's beating themselves up harder than a lot of us trying to get back into working, getting our kids back to school. So much stuff going on right now.
There is, absolutely.
So I'm going to hand over to you. If you're cool, I'll remove myself from the stream. Have fun. Ask Claire any questions that you want. Just hit end broadcast when you've done.
Lovely. Thank you so much,
my love. Bye.
Okay, so as Roxy said, this is my first time using StreamYard, so I'm going to try my best to figure out, make sure that I don't end the broadcast early. So I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me while I just... Oh, is that working? Right, let me... hold on one sec. This is me learning as I go. Right, here we go. So let's do that from the beginning. Here we go. So here are my slides. So welcome to Lockdown Life to Loving Life, the summit. So this is one of 16 amazing workshops over the space of 4 days, all about helping you get back to your best life again after lockdown. Lockdown has felt very long and very drawn out, and so coming out of lockdown, this is an amazing time to be thinking about living your best life and what we're going to do going forward. So this summit's hosted by the Ladies Life Lounge, and like Roxy said, my name's Dr. Claire, and I'm one of the resident experts in the lounge, and my specialty is in relationships. And today I'm here to talk to you about the most important relationship of all, and that is the relationship that we have with ourselves. So just as a bit more of as an introduction, I hope you can hear me okay. Like Roxy said, I've got the builders next door digging up the garden, I think they are. So hopefully you can hear me okay. So as Roxy said, I'm a clinical psychologist registered with the HCPC and the BPS. I spent a long time in the NHS, partly because that's the sort of training route for a clinical psychologist. So I was trained to doctoral level with the University of Exeter, whilst also undertaking a range of placements in various different mental health teams in the NHS. And then I chose to specialise in relationships because I really found myself resonating with the ways of understanding mental health that happen in relationships, that they're not individual flaws or dysfunctions or things that we're kind of holding as individuals, but that actually we have our thinking patterns and our emotions happen in relationships. So I started working in more relationship-based places in the NHS, so a couples therapy clinic where one partner was diagnosed with depression. I did some work in a perinatal clinic for mums who were struggling to bond with their new babies. And then I spent a long time in a service for children who were fostered and adopted. So really that was working with a lot of developmental and relational trauma. And then just at the beginning of 2020, about a month before we knew about lockdown, I left the NHS to focus solely on private practice. And in my practice, I see individuals, couples, and families. And the individuals that I tend to see do tend to be looking for help with relational trauma. And then see lots of couples, and I see lots of families. And usually the families is with regards to parent-child relationships, most often teens, but it can be younger. But also what I'm seeing in my private practice is adult children. So I know that sounds like an anomaly. You know, us as adults, inviting our parent into therapy to work on the parent-child relationship as adults. I'm also seeing lots of adult siblings coming in to work on their sibling relationship. And I see lots of step families going through divorce. And also I still see lots of families formed through adoption. So that's kind of an overview of me and who I am. And oh, I was going to ask you, I'm based down in Poole in Dorset. And if anyone's on live, do let me know where you're from. Let me know in the chat. Not that I actually could see it, but I will find a way of being able to see it. So yeah, do let me know where you're from. So what is our inner critic? This is what I'm here to talk to you about today. And why am I talking about inner critics? You know, this is the often negative and harsh voice inside of our head, or a feeling. So some people describe it as a voice and they're hearing particular words. Other people describe it as a feeling that they get, which is basically telling us that there's something wrong with us. Now, this shows up in so many different areas of our life, whether it's about our sense of a substandard performance, or maybe our unattractive appearance, maybe it's a character flaw, or poor intelligence, or you know, how much we feel like we don't fit in. It can show up in lots of different areas of our life. And people have different words for it. They can call it self-criticism, they can call it perfectionism. Imposter syndrome is a really kind of popular term at the moment that sort of gets bandied about. And also it can show up as shame. So we've all felt this feeling or had these thoughts that we're just not measuring up in some way. And it's often a really painful experience. And because of that, it gets in the way often of us being able to live our best life. It gets in the way of us seeking experiences, growing, developing, trying new things, and really being able to kind of have access to the things that we would like in life that would make us happy. And one of those ways is, you know, business. You know, it can show up in all these different ways and really gets in the way of us living our best life. So I thought it was a really great topic to talk about today in this summit. So have you had this experience of not feeling good enough in some way? And if so, how's it gotten in the way for you? How's it gotten in the way for you living your best life? So there are 4 ways that our inner critic can show up. And it might be that one resonates more than others, or it might be that all of them resonate. So let's talk through them. The first one is when we're reflecting on a situation where we felt like we were incompetent. Or it could be we're predicting a situation where we feel like we will be incompetent. So this is really around our sense of mastery or competency, which is, you know, around our knowledge and our skills. And these can be kind of broad, generic, you know, business in general, or it could be a particular skill within our business, or other things in life. It can be broad and general, or something specific. So oftentimes when it's around kind of careers or business, it can be things like, you know, financial success, the results that we're able to achieve, our growth or lack of growth, or some other measure that we use to quantify our sense of competence. Then a second way that it shows up is when we're reflecting on how lovable we feel we are. So this is more around how much we feel we're valued by others, how much we're fitting in, how much we feel we belong. So instead of what we can do, it tends to be based on more on who we feel we are, our personality. So that one's more around the kind of social aspect. So it tends to show up mainly in relationships. Maybe we don't feel funny enough, or maybe we don't feel interesting enough or clever enough, Maybe we're not dressing the right way, maybe we don't sound the right way, or we're not from the right part of town. These are all ways that our inner critic can show up when it comes to our lovability. The third way is actually based on the previous two, but instead of how we think we measure up, this one is based on how we think other people think we measure up. So this is our prediction of the way we're held in mind by others. And this one's likely to be strongest for you if you've had lots of experiences in the past that have led you to believe that other people see you negatively. And then the fourth one is shame. So shame is different to guilt. Guilt is when we feel like we've done something wrong, we've made a mistake. We're generally a good person, but on this occasion we've made a mistake, and so we feel bad, and it often leads to an apology or an attempt to make amends. Whereas shame instead is the feeling that rather than having done something bad, that I as a person, I'm a bad person. So it's not something we've done, it's who we feel we are. So when we feel shame in response to an experience, we tend not to be open to apologizing, because in apologizing, it makes us feel like we're kind of admitting how bad a person we are. And, shame doesn't just show up as ways in which we feel like we're lacking. Lacking desirable traits. It doesn't just show up that, I'm not just not clever enough, or I'm not thin enough, but instead shame shows up with the belief that we actually have undesirable traits. So instead of I'm not clever enough, it sounds like I'm stupid. Instead of I'm not thin enough, it sounds like I'm fat. So it tends to go a bit deeper, it tends to cut a bit deeper, be a bit more of a painful experience. And this one, it tends to exacerbate the social threat of being held negatively in mind by others, because we feel like, based on all these ways in which we're defective or not good enough, then other people will see that too, that they will judge us, they will criticize us, and they will reject us. Because if we're of no value, then we'll be outcast. And if we're outcast, we'll be all alone. And that's what makes it incredibly painful. So where does our inner critic come from? So the first one is view of self, our view of ourselves. And we first develop this, our sense of self, through the eyes and actions of our caregiver. So our self is literally reflected back to us through them. So how they treat us teaches us who we are. So if we've had a primary caregiver, and I use the term primary caregiver because I'm used to working in the adoption field, where primary caregiver can be different people at different times, but obviously for most people, this is, a parent, a mum or a dad, but it can be other people as well. So if we've had a primary caregiver who was warm and loving and responsive to our needs, then we might develop the belief that we're lovable and worthy of care. However, if we've had a primary caregiver who is, irritable or impatient, then we might develop the belief that we're irritating, we're a burden, or we're a nuisance. And if we had a primary caregiver who was emotionally absent or physically absent, then we might develop the belief that we're unworthy of love and care. And as we get older, this sense gets added to by the verbal comments that we hear our caregivers make, or our peers, or our teachers, or other family members. So if they're telling us that, like actively in words, telling us things, that we're lazy, or we're clumsy, or we're rude, or we're stupid, or we're naughty, then these words accompany the kind of implicit nonverbal messages that we get, and all kind of forms the foundations of our view of self. And then what we have is a confirmation bias. So then when we're going through life, experiencing the different things that we experience, we're seeing those experiences through this lens of our sense of self, our view of self. So we see the things that confirm the beliefs that we already hold. And these confirmation experiences kind of validate that this belief is true. So as we get older, it just gets more and more reinforced. And then in addition to our experiences, we also have our physiology. So this is where our brains come into play, as in that they are already hardwired to be threat focused. They're designed to ensure our survival. They are not about our happiness. They're not about living our best life. Our brains are completely designed for survival. So our brains automatically scan for threat, ways in which we're at some kind of risk of harm. So given that the risk to us in modern times isn't really about external safety as much anymore, in this modern world, it's more around social threat. This is the fear of being judged negatively, being criticized for not being good enough in some way, that we'll get rejected, we'll get outcast, that we won't belong. That is now the main threat that we face in modern times. So our brains will scan for evidence of this social threat. So that adds to all the other things that we've already talked about with regards to experience. And so then the third thing that happens is to manage all these fears, these threats, these painful experiences, we develop coping strategies because we're also hardwired to turn away from pain. We want to avoid suffering. So we want to manage these fears and threats to ensure that we don't feel the pain, and hopefully we'll stay socially accepted and belong to the group. So one way to do this, one coping strategy, is to predict it first. If we can predict that something will lead to a negative outcome and catch it before it happens, then we have a chance of doing something in order to influence a different outcome. So our brain starts telling us things, thinking that it's predicting something that might happen. So it might say things like, don't speak up because people will think you're stupid, or don't go for that promotion because you'll look like an idiot when you don't get it, or don't post that picture because people won't like the way you look. Don't try that new business idea because you won't be able to do it and you will fail. Don't invite that person out for drinks because they're probably going to say no and then you'll look silly. So this is all the ways in which our inner critic starts talking to us. It tells us, something might go wrong, therefore don't do it. So, form of self-protection. Our brain wants us to be alert for potential negative consequences so that it can stop us from doing something that will cause harm. But we hear these messages as truth. We don't hear them as a warning. We receive them in our brains as fact. And so when all of this is going on, we can become really emotionally triggered and really emotionally dysregulated. And our emotions can either feel really overwhelming and flood us, or we can get to a point where we just shut down and we just cut off and we just space out. But either way, when we're emotionally triggered, our brains function differently. So the threat part of our brain, the emotional part of our brain are in charge. They're running the show. And the thinking part of our brain is therefore largely offline. So we can't draw upon the rational part of our brain in these times to reason with or take charge over the fearful survival part of our brain. And that's why when we're feeling really emotional, we can't think straight. So what can we do then to tame our inner critic? Well, Kristin Neff and Chris Germer are the kind of main American proponents of self-compassion, compassion-focused therapy in the States. And this is a quote from Kristin Neff's book, "Become an inner ally instead of an inner enemy." So this is where we're seeking the opposite of self-criticism, of inner critic, which is self-compassion. It's the antidote to shame, and it quietens our inner critic. Most people who come to me and have a very strong and loud inner critic want it to go. They want it, they just want it to kind of go away and not have it at all. The reality is it's pretty difficult to get it to go away completely. partly for the reasons I've mentioned about the way that our brains are wired, but we can get it to quieten down. We can get it to be more in the background, more of a sort of niggle rather than up front and sort of leading. So that's what we're aiming for. So what's self-compassion and how do we develop it? So compassion at its core is a desire to end suffering. And self-compassion is extending that compassion to oneself. So for most of us, we're able to be compassionate towards other people, whether it's our kids, our family members, our friends. We tend to be able to access that compassionate response for others, but we don't tend to always be able to do that for ourselves. So leaning into the American model, because the British model is a little bit different, but leaning into the American model, it's defined as having three main elements. So that's self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness is when we're gentle and understanding with ourselves rather than being critical or judgmental. So that's clearly the opposite of the inner critic. It's this sense of being fundamentally warm and compassionate and soothing in our inner feelings and thoughts rather than the critical ones. And then recognition of our common humanity is also a really important component, because when we criticize ourselves and feel a sense of shame, we often feel like we're the only ones feeling that way, that we're alone in the world having this experience that, you know, doesn't happen to other people. You know, they look like their lives are going great. They look happy, their kids are well behaved, they're earning lots of money, whatever it is, the external way we compare ourselves. We feel like we know our inner thoughts and feelings and we're the only ones. You know, we don't feel like we're comparing our inner self to somebody's external self. So therefore we get this idea that it's only us. And therefore it must be about us, that something is actually wrong with us. Whereas if we can tune into the common humanity, we can realize that actually these thoughts and feelings we're having are a really common shared experience of life as humans, that this isn't just something that we feel, that this is something lots of people feel. We're not the only ones feeling this way. And so that can do two things. It tells us we're not alone. We're not alone in this experience. And it also tells us that it's not about us. It's actually not our fault. And then the third component of self-compassion is mindfulness. So I know mindfulness is talked about in lots of different ways and it's helpful for lots of different things, but it's a really important component of self-compassion, because we need mindfulness in order to hold our present moment experience in what's called balanced awareness. So we want to be able to see and feel and think what we're doing in the present moment, what our experiences are, rather than exaggerating it or distorting it or ignoring it. We want to be able to just sit with, and that's what mindfulness helps us to strengthen. So what are the things that we can do then to apply those ideas in terms of actually developing self-compassion? So these are, you know, action points that we can actually take. So the first one is we need to strengthen our capacity to self-soothe and comfort ourselves. So this is the idea of finding emotional balance when we're triggered. If we just get triggered straight into threat, then we're going to find it hard to stay with any of these experiences. So we really need to do that as job one. And this ability starts with our caregivers. So let me tell you about the infant distress cycle. This is the foundation, it lays the foundation for our ability to self-soothe. So if you think about the infant at the top there of the cycle, then, you know, infant has a need, whatever that need might be, and therefore goes into a stress response. And then they communicate that stress response that, you know, there's a need over here, you know, infant starts to cry, signaling parent or caregiver, hey caregiver, you know, I have a need over here, can you come and help? If we have an available, attuned and responsive caregiver, then our caregiver will notice our communication, will interpret it correctly, and will come over and soothe and calm us before meeting our needs and then enabling us to return to a calm state. And, you know, I often talk about this cycle in terms of attachment, which is also really crucial. But for today's talk, talking about it in our beginnings of being able to emotionally regulate, this cycle happens over and over and over again from birth. So, you know, hours and days and weeks and years, this cycle happens over and over. And through that process, it develops and strengthens the neural pathways in the brain to go from a threat response to a soothe response. However, obviously not all of us have had fully available or responsive caregivers, or who have maybe held the soothing response in mind. And that could be for multiple reasons. You know, one of which could be things like, you know, there's siblings. So our parent was, you know, juggling multiple children, and so maybe there was a delay in them being able to come over and respond to us, or maybe when they did come, they had to rush off again. You know, that's a really common reason. Another one is that maybe our parent was experiencing overwhelm, or maybe our parent didn't know how to emotionally regulate themselves either. So if they're not feeling emotionally regulated, what they might do is, you know, give us the milk, but they're not maybe doing the emotional soothe because they're not feeling calm themselves. Or maybe it was down to parenting practices that were culturally acceptable at the time. So when you think about things like crying it out as a form of sleep training, you know, not getting into a bit debate about that now, but looking at that from this perspective, it's not completing the soothe cycle. And, you know, even if we did have caregivers who were responsive to us and were soothing and nurturing and calming us, we're probably likely to have experienced a bit of a dwindling of this emotional soothing as we got older, because it's really normal that the older we become and the more complicated our feelings become, that the more difficult it is for our parents to respond to us with emotional soothing. Because they start to have expectations of us as we get older, and those can get in the way. So maybe it's an expectation around how do we communicate our feelings. So, for example, shouting is not acceptable. So our parent might focus on the shouting and not really see the reason why we're shouting, which is the emotion. So they're not responding to the emotion, they're only responding to the shouting. Or maybe it's an expectation of which feelings are okay and which feelings aren't okay. For girls, often, you know, crying is okay, but being angry might not be. Whereas for boys, maybe crying's not okay. You know, there's lots of cultural messages that we get around expectations of how feelings are expressed. Or maybe it's how long our parents are able to hear our feelings before we're expected to be able to kind of shift out of that and, you know, pull our socks up and, you know, get on with things. And as we get even older still, maybe our parents try to teach us things. So going into a lecture about things that we should or shouldn't have done, and lots of focus on behavior usually. So these are all the ways in which this cycle can get missed and can kind of therefore be weaker in terms of our ability to go into a soothe response. So it might mean then as adults, our ability to self-soothe might not be as strong as we'd like it to be. So what can we do to strengthen our soothe response? So let me ask you, what do you do currently to self-soothe? If you share some of the ways that you do it in the chat, let me know, how do you normally respond to yourself when you're feeling triggered? These are some of the ways that I recommend. The breathing. So breathing sounds really simple, but if we think about the threat response, it's a physiological reaction. And when our physiology reacts to threat, there's lots of things that happen in our bodies that we don't have any conscious control over. We don't have control over our heart rate. We don't have control over blood being taken away from our digestion to our muscles. We don't have any control over maybe getting sweaty palms. The only physiological response we have as a threat response that we have conscious control over is our breath. So if you think about when you get triggered, our breathing can become really shallow and fast, whereas when we're calm, our breathing tends to be slower and deeper. So breathing more into our tummies rather than into our chest. So if we think about the feedback loop, instead of our brains telling our body to calm down, what we're trying to do is get our body to tell our brains to calm down. So by consciously slowing down our breath, we can send a signal to our brain that everything is okay. And so the way we want to do that is what they call soothing rhythm breathing, which is the idea that we're not kind of doing it in an erratic kind of way. We're trying to do it in a rhythmic way because that's what's calming. So the way, I know lots of people teach it in different ways. The way I teach it, I found that lots of people struggle to hold their breath for too long because, especially if they're in a panic state, they can feel like they're not able to breathe. So I don't recommend people hold their breath for too long because it can be counterproductive. So the way that I teach it is to have a breathing loop that's the count of 10. So we want to breathe out for slightly longer than we're breathing in. So we breathe in for 3, pause for 1, and then breathe out for 4 and pause for 2. And that then becomes a rhythmic motion where it's kind of fluid. So that's one way of strengthening our soothe response. And the second way, and again, we're not really leaning into our brains at this point. We're kind of going with our bodies as a way of activating our soothe response. So the second way is imagery. And we want to pick imagery that is linked to our attachment system, because as we've seen, that's the foundations of our emotional regulation system. So we want to pick images that are really soothing and nurturing and bring that kind of warm, fuzzy feeling when we look at them. This doesn't take a lot of thinking. It's more of a reaction, you know, looking at baby hedgehogs or baby monkeys. I mean, I pick baby animals because of that link to the attachment system, but any kind of animals that resonate with you. So if you're a huge dog fan or a cat fan, pick those pictures, those images that resonate for you. Or if you're not a fan of animals, then picking photos that evoke a feeling of love or emotion or warm or nurture. And again, you know, really tailoring this to what works for you. You know, what works for one person might trigger something completely different in another. So it's really about playing around with this. These are images I found off Google. So it's really easy to have a look around and see what resonates. Or you can pick photos from your own family. These are my 3 little cherubs who aren't actually as little as this anymore. My son and my 2 daughters. And, you know, these are pictures that really fill my heart up. I get that warm, fuzzy feeling when I look at them and just see how cute and tiny they were, and the smiles and the achievement and all those things. That brings to me that warm, fuzzy feeling. But for parents of teens, this can sometimes be triggering. So if you're having a particularly difficult time or the relationship with your teen is strained, then looking at pictures of them when they were little can sometimes have the opposite effect. So again, do go with what works for you. And then the last way we can draw upon imagery is with a kind of calm, soothing place. So for me, that's the beach. I'm definitely not stressed when I'm at the beach. I'm lying on a sun lounger, you know, peaceful, the world, you know, watching the world go by. You know, this is a time when I find it easiest to be mindful, right? Because who doesn't want to be mindful when they're sitting on a beach? We can, you know, listen to the birds singing or the waves lapping at the shore, feeling the heat of the sun on our skin. You know, these are images that bring to mind, you know, calm, peaceful feeling. But again, you know, pick what works for you. If woodland is more your thing, then look for images of, you know, the thing that works for you. So that's our soothe response. And then we need to layer on top our compassionate self, because the soothe response, you know, is helpful, but we want to add to it. So we want to add to it the compassionate mind, the compassionate self. There's a few ways that we can do that. So one way is to take a moment to bring to mind someone you know, and this could be someone you know in real life or someone you know who's famous, who has compassionate qualities, and think about what qualities they have. Or you can think about what qualities mean the most to you, what you would like to have, ones that you value, that you think would embody more compassion. So share these in the chat. Let me know which qualities you think of when you think of compassion and the ones that feel important to you. Usually people talk about things like being warm, being kind, being empathic, being non-judgmental, being friendly, being patient. These are all qualities that can give us a sense of compassion. And then in addition to these, there are 3 other ones that have been found to encompass compassion for lots of people. So they're wisdom, caring, and strength and courage. So wisdom is this idea about being reflective, making sense of things, learning about things, growing, developing, perspective taking, having awareness. Caring is this idea about noticing and engaging with and trying to alleviate distress, which often comes with feelings of warmth and kindness and a sense of caring. And then strength and courage. We need courage to be able to engage with suffering, to be able to stay with distress, to be able to face our fears and our darker parts. To do this, we need to have a sense of being grounded and having our emotional balance so that we can stay with that suffering. And people often call that the window of tolerance. So how much can I tolerate is essentially, I guess, the word. How much can I tolerate? How much can I feel before it becomes too much and I get flooded, or before I shut down and space out, zone out, and try and distract away from? Because we need to be able to stay with the suffering, and that's the courage part, in order to develop our compassionate self. So once we spent some time thinking about these qualities, then we can either think about past times in which we've shown those qualities and tune into those memories, or we can imagine embodying qualities. What would we say? What would we do? How would we respond to life's challenges if we were embodying those qualities? And then we can make a plan to choose a particular day, choose a particular quality, and then that day embody that quality and act from that place. So if you pick caring or courage, for example, on that day, you focus on doing lots and lots of caring things, or lots and lots of things that take courage. And again, moderating that to stay within our window of tolerance. And then a second way to develop our compassionate self is acts of kindness. This one's a really simple one, actually, and it's one that we can do with our kids. It's a really accessible one for children. It can be really simple things like smiling at someone if we're not wearing a mask. It can be giving a compliment or thanking someone for something. Times when we're allowed in places, we could hold the door open for someone, hold the lift for someone. Or at the shops we can maybe help an elderly person with their shopping. It's kind acts of kindness for others. And whilst we're doing that, we really want to focus in on our intention to be kind and caring. That's what we're trying to strengthen. So when we've done those things, we've strengthened our ability to self-soothe, we've strengthened our compassionate self. The next step is bringing those two things to our inner critic. And the thing that we need to do in order to be able to do that is recognize when our inner critic is actually talking to us or communicating to us. So, we often spend so much time on autopilot. We're going through our day, not really very aware of what we're thinking, what we're feeling, our emotions, what's happening in our bodies. We tend to just kind of go on autopilot and focus on all the jobs that need to get done, all the things that we're doing during the day, and focusing on everything else. So, if our inner critic gets activated, we notice it. We know that it's happening because we're feeling it. But we tend to just kind of accept it as factual information. We just kind of accept that it's true and we just feel it. We don't really recognize that it's our inner critic. So to be able to break this pattern, that's what we need to do. We need to be able to recognize that it's our inner critic that's talking. So the skill that helps us to do that is mindfulness. Because mindfulness allows us to slow down and notice the present moment, to be able to tune in to how we're thinking, how we're feeling, what's happening in our body. This grows our self-awareness. So instead of feeling sad, for example, and being in the feeling, overwhelmed by the feeling, it's taking up all the room. Mindfulness helps us to notice that we're feeling sad. So there's the part of us that's feeling sad, and then there's the part of us that's noticing that we're feeling sad. And that's what mindfulness does. It gives us that gap to be able to observe our feelings. And, you know, there's loads of different ways in which we can develop mindfulness. There's loads of resources available. I'm sure you guys have already heard of lots of different ways. Apps that you can use, Headspace or Calm, tend to be the ones that are recommended. There's YouTube videos, audio programs, books. You know, picking the one that resonates most for you is, again, the advice. And, you know, doing this as a practice. It's not, we can't kind of do it once and then feel like that's enough. We do need to develop these neural pathways in the brain. So we need to practice over and over again to really kind of strengthen that skill. And then when we're able to slow down and be more present, we can notice when our inner critic is activated, notice any particular words that come to mind, or tone of voice, or key phrases. And this is where people start to find it quite hard, because it's the beginning of tuning in to something that we've usually learned to tune out of. You know, it's the turning towards the source of our suffering rather than turning away from it. And this is something that lots of people find really hard, because it's actually painful. It's not easy or flippant or light usually. It's usually pretty heavy and tricky. So this is where we need to draw upon the skills that we've already been strengthening. Our ability to self-soothe, our compassionate self skills, all of these things help us to hold this experience in the present moment. And then we need to deepen our compassionate response specifically to our inner critic. So we start by softening the blow of the critical voice. Lots of us really feel like it's a bully, because it really feels like it. And sometimes even the phrases and words used can bring to mind people who had mean intentions to us, or people we felt like had mean intentions towards us. So it can feel like an internal bully that we can't shake off. And so we kind of end up kind of hating the inner critic and getting caught up with all these difficult feelings. But if we start to notice and understand our inner critic, then we can soften the blow of that by realizing that it's actually trying to help us, even though it's not actually helping us. The intent, the way that our brains are wired, is a self-protect. There is that positive intent to it. It's trying to keep us safe. It's trying to help us improve or help us avoid a painful outcome. Being able to hold on to that positive intent softens the voice a little bit. It becomes less of a bully. And then we want to reword. We want to reword comments. We don't want to be telling ourselves self-critical things. We want to be telling ourselves kind, compassionate things. So lots of times people say, oh, you know, imagine this was happening to a friend. What would you say to your friend? You know, oftentimes people find that really hard to do because they know that it's not about their friend and they can't trick their brain into doing that. So I find with people, it's more helpful to imagine what a very compassionate friend would actually say to you. What would your friend say to you in this situation? And being able to tune into their compassionate intent for warmth and kindness and care. And, you know, another way of strengthening that is, if you get really stuck, is to try writing out some compassionate phrases on cue cards, doing this at a time when you're not triggered and you have full access to your brain, and really thinking about the ones that most resonate. You know, they need to feel genuine. We can't kind of pretend. It has to be something we genuinely believe. And some people practice reading them each day, and other people just have them for when they kind of feel like they need it. So examples of things you could put on a cue card is, it's completely understandable that you would feel this way. This is an incredibly difficult experience. Or, today has been a really hard day. Or, most people would have struggled with this too. We are all doing the best that we can. I'm feeling really sad right now. Today I made a mistake. Making mistakes is part of being human. It's okay to feel this way. Lots of people would feel this way in my position. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I need to breathe for a moment. So these are all examples. And the key is we need to be saying this to ourselves in a compassionate voice, because sometimes when I do this with people, they'll say to me, it's not working. I don't feel this caring, warm feeling, but actually they're kind of shouting at themselves to be more compassionate, or beating themselves up for not being compassionate enough. And obviously that kind of undermines the process. So we need to really, really try and lean into that kind of kind, caring, compassionate voice. So in summary, these are the things we've covered: strengthening our soothe response, our compassionate mind training, mindfulness and recognizing our inner critic, and then developing a more compassionate response. And if you follow these steps to tame your inner critic, it really can get quieter, and therefore it can stop getting in your way. So I'm Dr. Clair Burley. I am on social media. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, but obviously I'm also a resident expert in the Ladies Life Lounge, so you can find me hanging out there. And if you have any questions about today's talk, please do get in touch and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know how you found it. And, you know, in this summit's all about, you know, living our best life again after lockdown. And all the amazing speakers are talking about that in lots of different ways. But it's not just the summit. You know, this is what happens in the lounge anyway. So come and join us. The doors to the lounge are open. You can become a member today. What do you get when you come in as part of the lounge? So you get access to a library of online videos, downloadables, lots of masterclasses with resident experts each month, plus access to the back catalogue. It's an amazing community of really supportive women that you know, can be in the online space with. They really, really do have each other's backs. And like, you know, like me, there's lots of resident experts on tap doing different things in the group. There's also monthly group coaching calls, there's a book club, there's quarterly social events, there's loads of perks and discounts. And Roxy and Jodie are also very, very accessible. So these are all the things that you get in the amazing lounge. And these are the costs for the monthly membership or for the annual membership. But there is a bootcamp offer. So if you sign up this week, you can join for just £29 a month and then keep that price going forward. So that's all your information. If you want to sign up, this is my affiliate link. If you want to sign up with me, and then you will get access to my self-compassion workbook. If you have any questions about that, please do get in touch and let me know. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. How do I come out? This is where I have to learn to use StreamYard. Hold on one second. There we go. All right, so let's have a look at the comments. Oh, a couple of people talking about where you're from. Fantastic. And we have a comment. I feel like I am 25 all the time, immature and ask silly questions. I'm 43 and have an admin heavy job, but surrounded by very clever academics in higher education. Yes, Joanne, I know I'm good at my job, which is what I need to keep remembering. And the academics couldn't do my job. Exactly, they're different skill sets. So Joanne, exactly. So you're identifying, you know, the situation in which you may feel your inner critic gets louder, certain people maybe, or certain tasks that might be happening, or certain situations at work. So you can really start to notice, and then you already started to do that there, that you know that you're good at your job. You know, these are the things that we can write down on cue cards. And so if our brain isn't working when we're feeling triggered and feeling activated, then we can lean into those cue cards to give us, you know, that feedback, that compassionate feedback, where we can start to remember and lean into our compassionate responses. So I hope you guys have found that helpful. If you're watching this on replay, you know, do get in touch if you have any questions. It's been amazing to support you about this today. As you can tell, I'm really passionate about this. I feel like it's a really fundamental model, way that we can live our best life. And I look forward to seeing some of you in the group.